Welcome to Rocket with Chief, conversations to take you places. My name's Daniel Robus, and I'm your host of today's podcast, which is an out-of-season episode sponsored by BeyondTrust. Today, we are getting an African perspective on building a zero-trust network. And with the attack surfaces ever-changing in the world of modern cybersecurity, the discussion is very pertinent from an African perspective. We have guests who have got experience in both Africa and international, and we're especially intrigued to listen to our guest Siku, who is a ethical hacker. I hope you enjoy the discussion.
Thank you very much, Kerry, and thank you to Philippe, Brian, and Siku for joining us today. It's always good to be sharing information and learning from one another. I'm going to start at the top left of my screen with Brian, just to introduce yourself. And Brian, I know you're not on our continent, but we were discussing horses and outdoor stuff. What do you do for BeyondTrust, and why are you good to have on this panel, in your opinion?
Oh, that last piece is a good one, I feel. But I'm Brian Chappell. I've been with BeyondTrust now for a little over 10 years. Started as a sales engineer looking after EMEA and then picking up APAC, and through various roles, including product. I'm now Chief Security Strategist, which is odd. There's two of us, but I primarily focus in EMEA and APAC in talking to people about their challenges and their concerns and how they can best apply our technologies, other people's technologies in their cybersecurity strategies. So, having a long career myself in both being a purchaser of IT equipment and services, as well as a user of those things as well, positions me very well to have a good feel for what the people on the other end of this webinar are going through, as well as being able to bring forwards the knowledge that we get from being on the vendor side as well. So hopefully we can give the people something they can take away and do something with today. And I think it's going to be fantastic.
So Brian, now that borders are opening up again and we're getting into a level of normalcy, if you had to take a holiday trip to one of your business destinations on the continent, where would it be, and why do you think so?
I think for the continent of Africa, I went down to Cape Town many years ago, and I had a fantastic week down there. And I have to say, after the long 11.5-hour flight, it was the first time I've walked off of a plane and actually felt like I'd reached somewhere I wanted to be. It was amazing coming down over Cape Town as the sun rose in the aircraft and seeing the sun come up. I walked out the beautiful air and I just kind of thought, this feels like home. So I'd love to come back to Cape Town. Some colleagues of mine did an event there a few years ago and still rib me to this day that I had to be, I think I was in Germany or somewhere else, so I didn't get to come. So I would love to come back down and see Cape Town, but there's so much of Africa I haven't seen. You could spend a lifetime traveling around there, I feel.
I'm glad. Well, I'm opening the doors to the continent for you. If we can go to Kigali, we can go to Nairobi, we can go to Gaborone. I'll be there with you, no problems. Felipe, from a last-minute call-up, reserve off the bench, thank you for joining us today. We know that your name wasn't on the bill, but I'm really glad you have joined us. Felipe, what do you do for BeyondTrust, and why are you joining us today?
Well, thank you, Dan and team. I'm Philippe Galvao, responsible for enterprise business in the African region, WECA, as we know it, the West, East, Central, and Southern Africa. Been in the security realm for probably about 15 years in Africa. So back to Brian, whenever you want to come and join us, please let me know. I'll take you around.
Outside of South Africa, Felipe, what's your favorite country from a food perspective on the continent? Where's the most exciting?
Oh, wow, that would be biased. I am Portuguese, so it would have to be Mozambique, without a doubt.
Branche, frango.
Cameron.
Yeah, there we go, Cameron.
That's
that is
right.
great. Thank you, Felipe, and thanks for joining us. We know that Brett had an emergency which came up, and we just want to wish him well. So if you were expecting to see the good-looking Brett, we got subbed by the younger, better-looking Felipe, so that's cool. Siku, our guest from a different perspective. Today, we've got a hacker on the line, and you're going to explain what ethical hacking is for us. But before we go there, where are you from, and how did you get here? Why should we be listening to you today?
Thank you very much, Daniel. I'm a local guy, South African, born and bred in South Africa. So I've always had a passion for cybersecurity, then particularly ethical hacking. So I think what I'm going to bring forth, what I'm going to share, what I'm going to expound, what I'm going to basically share with the community is more around cybersecurity in terms of ethical hacking, more of TTPs, as well as security assurance and adoption of security controls, how to safeguard against this, not just simply security risk, but we are more looking around the sophisticated attacks today that we are facing today. How can we prevent those? How can we mitigate? How can we reduce the attack surface around that?
Now, before we go in this, in your culture, we don't have a traditional meal that has a dessert. And I know that's a very particular thing to an African culture, especially in the South. So if you have to anglicize yourself, if you had to invite Brian for dinner, what dessert would you serve him, and why would you serve him that?
I think in terms of dessert, because I think it would be your normal custard and pudding. Yeah, I think that's
that would be the. Oh, you've just won the vote from Europe, from the English. Warm custard. So, Siku, before we get into PAM and the differences between PAM and IAM, and I start throwing questions at you guys, let's just talk. What does an ethical hacker do? Do you hack with a big conscience? I mean, do you try and break into people and say, sorry about that, sorry about that? How did this career come about, and why is it pertinent in the security space?
So just to answer that one, basically an ethical hacker, we operate within, it's basically a proactive form of cybersecurity, where we look at security-related risk, and if we find that risk, basically we're hired by organization to look at to improve their security posture. When we find any security-related risk, we document those findings, and we also present solutions around that. So a normal hacker looking at the activist, looking at script kiddies, when they find these security weaknesses, they normally exploit and take advantage of this security flaws. So they don't necessarily report against this. They don't even issue any mitigation around this. They don't even document. They just compromise. We have seen even recently, TransUnion has been compromised, has been hacked by one of the Brazilian group. So normally what they do, they use this
so just
for
slow down
extortion.
there. Just for our friends north of the border, TransUnion is quite a big company in South Africa. If you haven't heard about that hack, it was all over our papers. I'm not sure if it made it north, but TransUnion was quite important. Why, Siku? Why was that quite important for us?
So because TransUnion is actually they collect credit information. They've got all our personal information when you credit bureau. So they've got collect data for this. For this is their business model. So when they were compromised, they were hacked. They've hacked one of their channel, SFTP, secure file transfer. So they've compromised that. They've compromised one of their customers, and they gain access into that repository, and they exfiltrated data. So to exfiltrate data is to actually copy data from that storage into your own through from their network, and they've deleted that data. So looking at this, we see that they've compromised a credential. They've compromised user credentials. So I think we'll also talk in line on how PAM can actually mitigate such risk related to password.
Okay,
Password attacks.
awesome. I think we're going to ask Brian and Philippe about that significant or quite a bit. When you come out and you've just said credentials, they stole their credentials and they used them. How does an ethical hacker like you prevent that? Isn't that what Brian and Philippe and the BeyondTrust team is meant to be doing? Or the inbuilt security team?
So normally when it comes to emulating, we call it adversary emulation. Adversary emulation, basically, we are looking at the techniques that an attacker will actually, the steps, how they execute all this initial access, looking at credentials. So we emulate that process end to end. We look at security misconfiguration, security flaws. If we identify anything, we document that and work closely with the defense team. Just the reason why we work closely with the defense team, because this is an ethical approach. This is actually to improve security controls within the organization. So attackers, they don't go through this. They don't even share this knowledge. They just compromise and they use this for extortion. With ethical hacking, we provide guidance and we close the gap between the defense team. We're coming from the red team, we're coming from the pen test, we're coming from the assumed breach pen test, looking at this tactics, and we emulate those tactics and we say, okay, we'll find the gap here. Maybe the password was not encrypted on runtime. On runtime meaning when the user log in into the system. Once they log in into the system, that user string, username, and password is presented in plain text. Now we'll go back to into the drawing board. It's a people teaming exercise as well. We're going back to the drawing board. We say, okay, because of this flaw, we need to fix this. We need to encrypt this, and this also talks to zero trust, secure by design as well principle, because you need to ensure that there is end-to-end encryption based on credentials, based on data, on runtime data on the store, data that is on rest. It needs also to be protected. It needs to be encrypted, and also depending on what type of data are we transmitting. Is it PCI data? Is it PCI data? Is it how valuable is this data? So we need to ensure that we provide this controls, we provide guidance, and we say, okay, we've tested this application, we can compromise the user password, we can see data being presented in plain text, you need to provide encryption. These are documented. This it's an exercise internally. We share this and we go into the drawing board to close the gaps for the defense team to able. Now, if an attacker wants to compromise the stack and wants to compromise the organization, the SOC team has already provided, they are aware of this tactics and techniques, and they're able to defend the organization. So that is ethical hacking.
So you almost auditors with a plan. That's really nice. Yes. I want to take a pause. I'm going to come back to you, Siki. That's a great dive into ethical hacking, but you touched on a few points there. And we were talking about IAM and PAM and zero trust, and you dropped a couple of things. So Brian, earn your pounds. Why is PAM important to us, and what's different from PAM and IAM? And do we have to use 3-letter acronyms for everything? What are they?
Well, I mean, the use of TLAs in IT, which is obviously 3-letter acronyms, can also be 2-letter, but we won't go there. IT has always been great in that there's always a great saying that IT is great for standards because there are so many to choose from, which makes it difficult. But it's just a habit. But zero trust, PAM, those kinds of things are really manifestations of how our environments are changing. We've seen an acceleration of things over the past couple of years with the pandemic, which were already somewhat in motion, which is that move away from the centralized environment where literally everyone works in one building, and like the walls and the edges of the communication on the edge of that building are the fortress, the perimeter that we defend with a passion and try and prevent people getting through. Over the years, it's become immensely apparent, and Siku mentioned the attack surface. The attack surface is growing and has been growing since I picked up my first computer, probably in 1981. When I first
Siku wasn't born yet.
Yeah, exactly.
He wasn't born yet.
Exactly. I know, that's where it gets embarrassing. I was only 11 at the time, I will say. I got my first computer, but it was... when I first worked in an office, we had no networks, we had no external connectivity. Then as networks started to come in, it's all contained within the building. You can see everything you're protecting, and then it begins to expand, and started adding cloud and all these external connections, and now we've moved things out into the cloud entirely. So, and networks have actually become very modular. And the term that came to me recently about it is it's kind of gone fractal. We get these repeated scenarios. Everything we have out there in the environment needs to be protected. And when you are that dispersed in the number of systems and environments you have to try and protect, you come down to what's actually the common thing across all of those. And it's about identities. Your identity is the thing that gains you access to all those different systems, and we have to make sure that we're controlling those. So identity and access management is a foundational piece of what I would call for cybersecurity, and an important place to focus. As an aside, I used to work at GlaxoSmithKline as a contractor over like 11 years. I was there for 10 and a half years. My last contract was 3 months long, and I was there for 6.5 years. At one point I left and came back. When I left, I had 7 privileged accounts in the system. I came back 15 months later, and 6 of my accounts were still active because they weren't in Active Directory, they were elsewhere. And those privileged accounts have access to everything in each of those environments. And so this is where privileged account management becomes a bit more of a concern. It's just about the level of access you have.
So just pause there. One of the comments in the chat, Jean-Paul said, explain to us the meaning of PAM and I am in full words, please. So just say PAM again. Say that again for me, Brian.
So PAM, unfortunately, generally has 2 common expansions. It's either privileged account management or privileged access management. We tend to refer to it as privileged access management. So it's not, Siku talked about credentials, and credentials are the things that authenticate you into the system. And then normally we talk about there being authorization beyond that. So, credentials get you authentication, authorization happens beyond that. And it's about that authorization layer. What does this thing get you access to? And how do I control when, where, how, and in some cases, why you have that access? And Siku will probably be able to talk to us later as well about we talked to the attack surface. There's also the attack chain. And this is, both of these things are things I lament because I've been saying the same things for 10 or more years now. They haven't really changed. An attacker will come in through a vulnerability, whether it's technical or human. And that really covers just about anything from clicking on a phishing link to downloading the wrong application to picking up a USB stick in the car park and plugging it into your work machine, and all the technical issues it can have through configuration and everything else. Once they land on the machine, it's unlikely to be where they need to be. So they'll look to move across your network, lateral movements, as we call it. And for that, they invariably need some kind of privilege, because the standard user gets you onto the box you're on, doesn't get you across the network generally. So that's where the privilege piece comes, because they'll get through the vulnerability. The first thing they're looking for is a privileged account. So the more control we have in that space, the more we have to stop the person. We've all heard that it's not if, it's when. And that is absolutely true. And I've often said at conferences, if you don't think you've been hacked yet, you probably got lucky and they didn't find anything that was useful.
So wait, pause there, Brian. Pause. Brian, you come with a wealth of knowledge, and Siku, you come with a whole different avenue of knowledge. I want to bring Philip in from more of a business person. Philip, what does zero trust mean to you from a BeyondTrust perspective, and how does it tie into what Brian and Siku are talking around? And I would love just answer the first one, and then we can dive into the second. What is zero trust? What does it mean for our audience today?
Yeah, thanks, Dan. So exactly like Siku and Brian have mentioned, Siku alluded to, from a business perspective, a lot of organizations tend to have many disparate solutions and systems and legacy solutions and systems. And zero trust, I think, to put it bluntly, is trust nothing and validate everything. So from organizations that are building, more often than not, security is an afterthought. So you want them to put that into their planning when building a network, ensure that security is, of course, utmost importance. And if you go in believing that nothing can be trustworthy, and that you need to continuously validate all people and access to privileges. So
everybody is treated equal by having no faith in them. Is that what we're saying? We're going to authenticate everybody. Brian, I can see you nodding. Am I on there, Philip?
Yeah. Well, all equal? No. Of course, there's, as Brian mentioned earlier on, there's certain privileges and access to those privileges. You can't give an administrator the same privileges or access as a IT analyst. It's got to be different from that perspective.
Okay. All right. Brian, I've got quite an interesting question for you that's come through via LinkedIn. If you don't know, all of you that are on this call, you're also on LinkedIn. That's amazing. Where Richard is asking, we know zero trust technology is often able to block access from certain listed geographic locations, but are they supporting impossible travelers yet? So if we take Siku, who is on our trusted list, and he travels to a geographic location which is embargoed or tied off, is there a way that he can get access to what he needs to do his job?
Well, that's an interesting, challenging question. Probably not directly zero trust related, but you are at the mercy of regulatory compliances wherever you go, and if your organization for whatever reason cannot allow access from a location, there really isn't much you can do about that if it's accessed back into your environment. We see more and more services being moved towards the cloud, and in those scenarios it may be something that can then be accessed because actually the system itself is hosted in the country that doesn't have the similar kind of controls. I'm somewhat loath to mention VPNs in terms of access. We've all used them from countries that have tight restrictions on their internet services, etc., to get back to.
I don't want to go down the rabbit hole. I thought if BeyondTrust had a way of identifying a user, they would say it. So the simple answer is it's complicated. Siku, you wanted to add something to that, or can I ask you another question?
Based on regions.
Yeah, if you wanted to, but I would like to ask you something different. I'd like to ask you, Brian spoke about this attack surface, which is rapidly morphing because of our work from anywhere. And I especially think about our friends up north in Africa, where we are expanding at a huge rate. If you had to say the three things that would give you, as if you went into an environment, to give you a sense of, okay, these guys know what they're doing from a zero trust perspective, especially on PAM, privileged access management perspective, what are the three things you look for in somewhere to see if there's a weakness or if they are on the right track?
So when it comes to zero trust security, firstly, we need to look at identity, how access is managed. We look at endpoints. We are talking about the your malware inspection, security controls related to endpoints. We are looking at data, how data is being managed. We are looking at applications. We are looking at infrastructure. We're also looking at the network. That is, in a nutshell, zero trust. So we are looking at this end to end. So that this security end-to-end, encryption end-to-end. We're looking at IM, how it's being driven. It's end-to-end. So in some instances, you find this in an organization, they would have their identity and access management. They will have an endpoint. They will have data controls, how to control the data, to tokenize the data, to mask the data, to encrypt the data. On applications, it's required to have SSL implementation, and it needs to meet the certain standard. Maybe it's TLS 1.2, the minimum. On the infrastructure, we are looking at segmentation. On the network as well. So within an organization, sometimes it's not possible to have all this end to end, to have encryption end to end. You would require an exception. So an exception is to say, I'm aware of this problem. I'm disclosing this, so I need an exception so that this is basically for audit and everyone to be aware. But when an attacker is able to gain access into that environment, an attacker won't say you have an exception. An attacker won't say, no, this exception, we understand that you are transmitting your data in plain text. Data on the store does not have encryption on data on rest. The attacker just come in and hit the environment and also move laterally. If there's any weaknesses when it comes to identity, then they start basically it's that is the initial access. That is initial access. We can also map this from the ethical hacking perspective to map this as well with a MITRE ATT&CK framework, because there should be a framework in place on how to inform this type of attacks. There should
so that would be your first thing you would look for, is a framework. Yes, you took a politician's way of getting there. So the first thing we look for is a framework. Okay, now I'm with you, Suku.
Yes.
You got to pause now. I'm coming back to you because I want to ask that of Brian. And Brian, how do you know when you've got a sale? When someone comes in, they want to have zero trust. What are the things that say they definitely need you? What are we missing?
It's an interesting one in that I find actually frustratingly over those 10 years of saying the same things, that the attacks that happen are still coming in through the same routes and the same accesses. The attack chain hasn't changed. So invariably when somebody's coming forward saying, we'd like to look at zero trust and we're thinking about this, you'll talk to them about what they have in place currently. As Siki was saying, he's going in and looking for those things directly. We'll ask them, what kind of controls they have in place. And invariably you'll find gaps in what I would call the fundamental technologies of cybersecurity. Years ago, I was at a conference in Dubai, and I looked out in the morning from my hotel room, and I could see out into the desert. And I thought about the sands being a bit like the attack surface, in that it's constantly moving. And when you think about building your cybersecurity strategy, zero trust or otherwise, you're building a platform out there, and you're building this beautiful edifice on top of it, where you're putting all your controls in place. But then the sand shifts, and the whole thing topples over. So there are these foundational pieces, these piles you have to sink down through the sand that are going to anchor your cybersecurity strategy. So anytime I find that those foundational piles.
So what are those?
There's a good few of them. We
top
cover
three.
The top three. I mean, I would actually have to stick in the space where we operate. Privileged access management is fundamental. Getting control over those is a big bang for your buck, is the best way to put it. Endpoint privilege management, because the endpoint is still the most likely place a hacker is going to land in your environment, even if they are an internal person themselves. So getting control over privilege on those endpoints, making sure people don't have too much access is fundamental. And then securing the remote access, both inside your environment and from outside in. We see so many vendor-based attacks coming in as well. And if you think about it, those are all really basic, They can be really simple. They're not
Yes.
tied to one another. So you don't have to do it all at once. You can pick away at these things. But when you've got those kind of things in place, and then you move on to vulnerability, patch management, configuration management, they're all just fundamentals that just get put to one side because they're seen as boring, dull, not important right now.
So we've got two questions in the chat that are almost the same. Danielle and Slindile have asked us. The first one is, how does combining IAM and PAM solutions help organizations achieve zero trust? And then hot on the heels, Slindile is saying, how do we prepare for a zero trust model in the cloud? I'm going to say in a hybrid environment. Siku, I don't mind if you want to start first, and then we can move to Brian and Philippa. I can see you making notes there, but dude, I'm coming for you straight after this.
So just to answer this, in the cloud, normally the cloud providers, they've got this controls in place in terms of IAM. So I think in terms of IAM, I think from the technical and strategy, Brian will answer that. However, if you use any cloud provider, they should provide you with IAM, and IAM policy is the one that drives access within your cloud environment. And normally there's also baseline and configurations as well in terms of IAM, how you drive IAM policies within your environment. That you want to expose this certain functions into the public network, or you want to restrict that access into your environment, your bucket where you store the data, how to control that bucket, access into that bucket, because everything is more around IAM driven as well as API. So basically, it's IAM policies that drives access into everything within your cloud tenant.
Brian, do you want to dive into that one as well? Do you need me to?
Yeah, absolutely. Siku, absolutely spot on there with saying IAM is fundamental in that. And as you were saying, Daniel, in it being a hybrid environment, that IAM is probably already within your infrastructure, and you're federating your identity either across in the cloud environment or from a cloud environment. You know, we have Azure AD these days. And similar kind of technologies which are based on LDAP with other cloud providers. And you want to make sure there's consistency across your environments. And actually one area where I see a big risk in cloud is actually in the entitlements that are associated with the default accounts or the highly privileged accounts in the cloud, the things that are actually controlling the cloud, and often those IAM components that Siku mentioned. So I have a 4-letter acronym for you, which is CIEM, or Cloud Infrastructure Entitlement Management. And that's a mouthful. Try saying that one. You've had a few. That's really about focusing on trying to make sure you understand who's been granted what out there, and make sure that nobody has been granted anything that's unusual out there, because that not only opens up a risk in your environment, but also could be a good indication that somebody has managed to compromise something in your environment and is changing things, however subtly, to start to gain more access. But yeah, that hybrids where we are, whether we're ever going to get fully in the other direction, I don't know. But, you know, at the very base level, the problems are exactly the same. They're still computers, it's still software, it's still running on a machine somewhere, it still needs access. The thing people need to do in many of these circumstances is not get overawed by what seems to be the size of the problem. I often use a terminology of the big ball of string. You look at a problem, it just looks like the biggest ball of string you've ever seen, with lots and lots of loose ends. And my advice to that is just grab the first loose end you get to hand, and start getting some progress, get some success under your belt, and that ball gets smaller much quicker than you'd ever imagine.
I'm going to ask Philippe a question, but while he's doing that, Brian, I want to, I've had 2 or 3 questions regarding what is the technology makeup for a zero trust environment, which I'd like you to answer. But Philippe, what I'd like to ask you is, for a medium-sized company, let's say $75 million to $250 million annual, can we do this on our own? So can we go to BeyondTrust and get stuff, or do we need partners? What is the makeup? Do I need to reskill everybody there? Can we even go down a zero trust road on our own, or is the rapid bang for your buck getting Brian's talk, including a partner into this discussion?
Well, I think it's twofold, Dan. And first and foremost, from a trusted advisory perspective, of course, we can advise and we can guide and assist. But our model is purely that. We do need a channel partner, preferably a partner in Africa that is skilled, that has the ability, and preferably local as well, to be able to support our customers in country, big or small. As Brian alluded to earlier on, there's many foundations, there are many components that build up zero trust. So it's important that we get the right people in to assist.
Awesome. Okay, so the kind of leading edge to that question was the threat actors are fairly sophisticated now. Can companies keep up with it, or is that where specialists like Siku and his team come into it? Yeah, Brian, you can answer that.
I can give a stab on that. Yeah, I think Siku kind of mentioned at one point script kiddies as well, and I think there is the majority of the people out there attacking you are in that space. I mean, the deep web and the services that are provided there mean that anyone with a credit card can launch a ransomware attack, or can have a system go and look for vulnerabilities and accesses into an environment, and even deploy the tools that need to be deployed to then exfiltrate data. So there is still an enormous amount of that, and in my opinion, I would say 90% of the hacking is drive-by, as I'd call it. Those old enough
incidentals.
For those old enough to remember war games, as kids, we all wrote war games dialers where it would start at one telephone number and just keep incrementing it until it got to the second. Now we do that with IP addresses. And that's something you need to be conscious of.
So Brian, are you seeing companies in your region just adopting zero trust? Is that kind of the standard now, and what's driving this adoption?
Zero trust is definitely on the forefront of most people's minds, I think, and I'm seeing that across the globe, and that's being driven by the changes in our working practices more than anything. It's the fortress mentality of we could build a big wall and sit behind it feeling relatively safe was always an illusion, because it only took a disgruntled worker who's already inside the wall, or for the hacker to knock one block out of the wall and they're in. Now that's it, you've lost the game. So there was always a need to be more modular, more focused in your perimeters. So every device in your environment you should think of as having a perimeter. But zero trust drives you in that direction, because it's saying, okay, in the past we might authenticate you and authorize you with a big token that says you have access to all these things. And from the time you've logged in to the time you log out, that's you, nothing changes. And those who have Windows environments will know the thing of you add someone to a group, you've got to log out and log back in again to get your group memberships updated.
Yes.
Zero trust goes, my identity gets to the system I'm trying to access, and it just goes, hang on a second, I'll just check you've still got access to that environment, it's still appropriate, and that token's still valid. So it is kind of bringing those perimeters to each one of those, and as I say, entirely driven by the changes in the way we're operating, and that's going to affect everyone who's running IT. Just, I think the cloud has brought those kind of things to everyone at the same time.
Okay, I've got a question from Siposetu, which is, what is authenticated vulnerability scanning in a PAM environment?
Of vulnerability in PAM environment.
Yes.
I think that one in terms of privilege and access management. So when we're looking at vulnerabilities and we try to address issues related to PAM, also in light with a zero trust security model. And when we are talking about this security model, we're talking about as well as a zero trust network, zero trust data, zero trust identity, zero trust. Basically, that is a principle within the environment. And we're also looking at when you want to mitigate the risk, you need to also look at, I'm still answering the PEM vulnerability.
I got it.
Also,
I got it.
you
But
also
basically, we need to be neurotic. We need to not
Yes,
trust
yes.
anyone. We're going to look over our shoulders. Do we not slow business down like that, Siku? Do we not slow business down like that?
Can you repeat that, Daniel?
Do we not slow business down like that?
Basically, security is an enabler. It's not a blocker. So it's to enable the business to ensure that you safeguard the environment within your estate, you reduce the security posture. It's not to block and say, no, you cannot deploy this application, you cannot do this. We just provide guidance that when you deploy this application, when you implement your identity and management, you need to consider this type of attacks. You need to implement this type of controls to mitigate the risk. It's not a blocker, it's an enabler. So
No, I love that.
Vulnerabilities related
like
to PEM
I like
there.
that answer.
So,
Could I add a little to that?
Yeah, I love that. I like that.
I mean,
answer.
I am so happy to hear Siku saying that. It's not something you often hear said, and it's one of the things they talk about in terms of challenges, because you'll hear a lot about we need to educate our people, particularly about things like phishing attacks and etc. And that is a really difficult thing to do, because generally we are seen as the people who are saying no. No, you can't have iTunes on your laptop to listen to music at work because, we can't let it update and all these sorts of things. But the technologies exist to allow your users to be enabled. So, like the BeyondTrust, we're very into what's called the principle of least privilege. So this was a saying that goes all the way back to 1973, and a man called Jerome Salzer, who was one of the architects of the Multics operating system, which is like the grandfather to Unix. And he wrote that each process and user should have the least privilege necessary to operate. Let's face it, no operating system since then really does it, or does it well in any way, shape or form, which is really disappointing. But the technology is there to enable you to do that. So users are only ever standard users. They never change. But we can then enable them to install iTunes, and just iTunes from Apple. And the update of that can run with the necessary privileges without giving any other privilege on the system or putting any other risk in there. And risk is an important thing, because we are talking to business people here. They talk
Yes,
so
I like that.
when we go that route, we begin to be the guys saying yes all the time. And hopefully then I think our staff, etc., will come along on the journey, because we're the good guys. We help them do stuff. And you can take that a step further and say, and Siku really did mention this with business. I often refer to what we do not as cybersecurity, but it's business continuity planning. Because when you're hacked, you can't do business because you're too busy running around trying to get everything working. You can look at Maersk as an example of that. They spent 6 weeks back in paper trying to move containers around. So when you've got good cybersecurity, you're watching your competitors struggle with being attacked while you're sailing along, having a good time doing business.
Oh, I like that. We've got a great question from Jean-Paul, which kind of I asked earlier, but he's just asked it much better than I did. So Philippe, this is for you. Is there somewhere where he can see detailed documented steps of how we can build a zero trust model and providing access to enterprise data and information to relevant users? Does BeyondTrust have a knowledge bank that our guests can go and see? Is there a knowledge base? Is there a repository? Do you have white papers? What can we get from a zero trust perspective from BeyondTrust? And then I'm going to ask Siku, where can we go and learn from other people as well?
Yeah, so there is some information that, of course, we gladly share. On our website, we have information available as well. But I think the best guideline would be the NIST, the National Institute of Standards, to see your progression and compliance and auditory. I think it's all relevant and it's all very much available. You mentioned earlier on, big or small organizations can follow that particular process, but please, by all means, I'll gladly assist and share information.
So we can go onto the BeyondTrust website and we can get white papers and case studies there as well.
Yeah, with some information. Of course, some is relevant to us sharing it. Thank you very much. I think Brian has already just put up the NITS. Thank you. The link. So there's a vast amount of information, and it's a guideline. There's the standards that one needs to follow for organizations with, of course, compliance and auditory concerns. That's the best way to go about it.
Siku, where do you suggest we go and get a different perspective on it? Where can we start? Where do you suggest people go and self-educate on Zero Trust?
So in terms of Zero Trust, Microsoft as well provide this knowledge and to understand how to actually mitigate against security-related issues. Particularly as we're looking at identity with BeyondTrust, I think we also need to understand the best practice for password hygiene and password management. So that is key as well in terms of identity, because the first thing that an attacker would do is to gain an initial access into the environment. What is that? Initial access basically is to credential harvesting, is the tactics and techniques around how to steal password, whether you construct a dropper, you send it via a phishing attack, you want to gain some information from the user, you want to gather this credentials. So we need to be able to manage that. That is also part of to adopt best practices around that, which is another component of this Zero Trust module. So Zero Trust is not only identity and access management. Yes, identity and access management, it forms part of this. It's key, it's very important. It grants you access into the environment, but you also need to look at other controls as you implement this Zero Trust end-to-end.
That's awesome. Thank you very much. I've got one more question from Brighton, and then I want to ask about your forward thinking, Brian and Philippe and Siku. Brighton is saying, for isolation monitoring and auditing privileged sessions, does PAM help on firewall level only, or does it go to application level as well, i.e. onto your ERP system, your procurement system, your HR system? Brian, can you dive into that one and let me know?
Yeah, absolutely. I would say that privileged sessions head or come to you for any privileged access, irrespective of what the end system looks like. It's not just about managing your firewall, it's about managing your servers, it's about managing your endpoints, but it does go out into your applications. Our product Password Safe will manage sessions out to your ERP systems. We have support for things like SAP, etc. You can go further than that and access just about any system with privileged accounts, and through that you're never releasing the credentials. You're changing the credentials every time they're used, because the machine's doing the authentication. You use massively long, entirely random passwords using cryptographic random number generators so that they can't be predicted, and all this kind of goodness, this good source that goes on the technologies. So yeah, it's as broad as you want it to be, but again, I would always caution people to say that any kind of cybersecurity, Zero Trust especially, is a journey. It's not something you do in one big bite. So even within that, don't get overwhelmed by the scope of I've got thousands of applications. How am I ever going to do this? Lots of them are never going to need any privileged access, or it's going to be very limited. Some of them are not really worth protecting because the data that's in them is publicly accessible. Those kind of things you have to assess. But I will keep going back to get the basics right, get your infrastructure secured properly and the access to that infrastructure secured properly, because that's the piece that Siku mentioned. Everything's built on top of that. It's a chain, and you've got to make sure that the base links of the chain are secured. You work your way up the chain, but do it at your pace. Do it how it works for you.
So I saw something in preparation, which is just-in-time Zero Trust. Are we taking this too far? I mean, are we trying to make it cool for the sake of making it cool, or is that now a real thing, Brian?
There are two things that have been brought together, to be honest with you. Just-in-time existed before Zero Trust. We talked about just-in-time in PAM, in access management generally, in fact. And it's around, not having any standing privileges, as you might call it. So, as I said, everyone's a standard user, including the people administering your environment. They never log in directly with any kind of privileged access. So they have zero standing privileges. When they need access to something, that's the point at which the privilege is granted. So just in the time you need it. And ideally, if you've got a strong change management process, which I consider fundamental in a cybersecurity strategy, you've also got a window of operation. So they only get the access for that time.
Almost like when we bring contractors on for a project.
Exactly.
So, Siku, are you seeing customers embrace this just in time for PAM, just in time for access? Is this a more and more common trend?
Yes, indeed. It's good in terms of manage your identity within the environment, whether it's on cloud or it's on-prem. So I think something that I would like to add there is, as we drive in this, and I like Brian when he said this, zero trust is a journey. It's a journey in terms of adopting zero trust into your organization. But we also need to look at this through the lenses of minimizing the risk, through the lenses of also addressing vulnerabilities related to password hygiene, how we manage this across the estate, and also some of the implementation around multi-factor authentication. We also need to implement all these controls and to adopt a password safe. It's one of something that BeyondTrust also provide, password safe, how to store your credentials, as well as making it randomness. So and I also like the Brian also mentioned list privileges. So list privileges also talks to the principle of minimality, that you grant a user an access that they require to perform their role. This is tied to role-based access control. So it's also tied to that as well.
This is assuming, obviously, we understand our applications, we understand our business, and we understand what people need to do. And staff turnover is in jobs and roles. So, Philippe, I've got a question for you. It's more of a philosophical one. On a scale of 0 to 10, where 0 being it's not even started yet, 10 being, you doing customer visits just to ensure that they've got access to brochures because they've got zero trust bedded down. Where do you think we are as a continent embracing zero trust, in your opinion?
So, yeah, it's a hot topic right now, and it has been, I'd say, for the last year or so. However, on the continent, I think we're still very, very far behind. There's a lot of work to be done, a lot of education, a lot of awareness. But if I have to rate it from a 0 to 10, and please don't quote me, this is purely on a general.
This is live, dude. We're quoting you. So what you say here is whatever.
Very, very trim 3 and 4%. 3 and 4 rating out of 10, absolutely. Yeah, of course, some organizations are well on their way, 8, but it's a process. There are many components. There's a lot of work to be done, and of course, it's the administration thereafter. So it's not just a plug and play and hope for the best. There's a lot of work to be done thereafter. What
would it take to get us to a 6? What would your next steps be that you would look for?
So one would need to identify, each organization is very different, but identify where the pain points are, where the gaps and the uncertainties lie, and then guide them from there. So, many organizations already have taken on firewalls, endpoint, other antiviruses and other components leading up. As we mentioned, it's a process. It's many layers that's going to form zero trust. So I think, that's a starting point, and then let us guide you and advise on the next steps on what to add. Privileged access management from let's take banking, government. There's a lot of components that need to be compliant and tick those boxes. So awesome. Let us guide you with that.
Philippe, so my last question for you before I get to Brian and Siku to wrap. If you had a ticket to any security knowledge share conference coming up in the next 12 months, what would it be to attend, and why would you go to that particular conference?
Yeah, probably something where we're elaborating and adding on to zero trust. So as I mentioned, it is a hot topic. I think it covers a vast array of many components that would form a complete security solution. There's no such one size fits all. So it's pick and choose, but certainly another zero trust component to add.
Okay. Brian, for you, looking ahead, what's coming out of this stable that from a BeyondTrust perspective that we should be excited about? And what's on the horizon for you? What the new changes coming?
Yeah, I think it's, cloud is the next frontier, so to speak. We're kind of already fairly well into it, given that it's probably 20 years old in many ways. But from a BeyondTrust perspective, more and more focus, we already have a product out there available in cloud form, so they can be consumed as services. Our portfolio covers a lot of the privileged access management space, probably the broadest coverage of any vendor, but we'll be bringing that more together into a single solution that is cloud-based, much more leveraging things like machine learning. I don't like AI because we haven't got AI. We've got machine learning. But machine learning, it helps deal with what I've often said as one of the biggest problems we have as cybersecurity professionals is that every morning you open up your machine, there's a tsunami of data comes at you, and just trying to pick out the little pieces while also trying to firefight everything else that's going on, the relevant actions, is difficult. So tooling is, with everyone, going to move more towards that. More, I'm going to help you do your job, as opposed to just giving you like a hammer. This is going to tell you which nails you need to hammer in as well, that sort of thing.
Outstanding. Thank you for joining us, giving us your time this morning. Siku, as our guest of honor, the bell at the ball, I want to ask you, if you were talking to new work entrants, what would you say to them from security as a career? Why would they take security as a career for new entrants into this market?
So I think as a career, basically it exposes you to different technology and to understand different processes, and also how to understand in terms of mitigating against the risk. Basically, security is all about reducing the risk and mitigations around the risk. So it's a very interesting space to be in. And with, I think in this space, you also need to understand different technologies. You need to understand processes. You also need to understand how people, they interact with technology, and what risk related to technologies, people, process, and technology. I think it's a very, very interesting space. We learn a lot in this space of cybersecurity. So I think it's a very interesting space to be in.
Outstanding. It's always changing and always challenging. I think if
Yes.
You're still learning after all this time, then you've chosen the right place. We do have a question for you, Brian, from LinkedIn, but I'm going to actually ask you to answer it on email for Rachel, who's asking, in this era of digital finance and fintech, what cybersecurity controls would you recommend? But I'm not going to ask you to answer that now, because we are 1 minute and I can see the bosses come onto the call. So from me, for the three of you, thank you for putting up with me jumping around and asking all these questions. Thank you for educating our audience. The BeyondTrust team for sponsoring today. It makes knowledge share something we can get across the continent. I hope you as attendees have learned as much as I have. Daniel Robus, your host, handing the ball back to Carrie.
Thanks, Chad, and thanks again to you guys for attending.